This is the first step in developing the rigid box structures. From our 3D file, if we're working in this direction, if you develop the 3D file first and you work out your geometries and how the boxes are going to work, we need to get that information out of the 3D file so we can actually build something from it. So this is more like a shop drawing, a layout drawing. It's a different process. When I did the demonstration for the corrugated box, what I did from the 3D file was create a die line, because we're folding up the structure from sheet material and we have to allow for those tolerances to get that to work. So that's the kind of the process that we need to do for a corrugated structure. This is different. This is a rigid box. So we're actually going to build a box by hand, quite often out of separate components. So we're not necessarily developing a die line. Die lines are used to make rigid boxes, but it's a different type of approach. As a designer, we want to work out the geometry and how this is going to work and have an understanding about that, and then figure out how the parts are going to fit. And the vendor quite often will make decisions about how they want to cut things out. They might want to use a die to make multiple components. They might want to hinge components together, which is like the first demonstration I made. So what we have to do is get the geometry out of the computer. So in Rhino, I just laid out these parts. I got the front view with my split line in the middle. I have the top view so I can see how big things are going to be. And then I have this open view that shows how the tray fits with the other components. So this is the same detailing and geometry that I've done for several packages for this project, but I just want to guide this particular process for rigid box construction. So what we have to do, and this is our first assignment, is after we develop our 3D file, we have to get the information out of the computer so we can make this. So this is essentially a shop drawing. So what I've done is I've just cut my panels. I figured out how big how things are going to be and how they were going to fit, and cut out all these panels, and that's what I'm going to use to glue that together. So that's what this will be, and then once I glue these boxes together, we're going to wrap them in a gold material and assemble the whole structure and make, I wouldn't even call it a mock-up. It will be a prototype. It'll be as good as production. So this is very similar to what should be covered in the production class. I'm still using the Muay Thai Baiju brand and the bottle. And I know I did the corrugated box for this that was developed from a die line from the 3D file. So I'm using the exact same geometry to make a rigid box. I kind of want to show the difference in the techniques and the deliverables, things that need to happen to get this to work. So there's actually three things going on here. I'm going to demonstrate how to make it out of chipboard and wrap it. I have a foam core mock-up here of what the rigid package would look like. So it still has, it's just like the corrugated box. It has the magnets at the top. We have the inset tray, and then we have those little beveled extrusions in the bottom to get this geometry to work. So I've reviewed this geometry several times, so I'm not going to get too involved in how this works, but it's a matter of building these components and get everything to fit. And this automatically just sits in this beautiful open position when we have the bottle inside. And then when you close it, it traps the bottle at the top. So that's how this works. So this would be a foam core version of the rigid package made to try out the geometry and demonstrate it. So this is not a prototype, it's just a mock-up to prove out how things work. And I'll talk about that. So for our class, it is okay to use mock-up techniques. It doesn't have to be fully wrapped like a case bound. So we'll call this a mock-up, but when you wrap the chipboard with the material and everything, that would be a prototype, because that would be simulating production. So that's a nuance in the language about how we make some of these things. So this is the geometry we're going to follow, and this is 1/8" foam core, excuse me, which is very, very close to the thickness of this chipboard that I'm using. This is a 2-ply. It's quite thick. It's just about 1/8", slightly less. So I can almost follow this geometry perfectly, which is kind of good. This kind of proved it all out. And it's a little easier to work with the foam core, and I'm not wrapping it. When I build these, I'm going to wrap this whole thing, and that's going to be a little bit more complex. But it's going to be beautiful because I have some gold semi-metallic paper that I'm going to wrap around this chipboard. So you'll see how this kind of relatively ugly chipboard is going to turn out to look really beautiful wrapped in the gold, because the gold is obviously part of the brand language. So that's what we're going to work on there. So I've started, I cut out these pieces. I'm going to make multiple components. So when I made the foam core and the corrugated of this, I made this all in one piece. I mean, this is multiple pieces of foam core, but I have this bottom piece that I integrated in here and just put a hinge in it. So it's essentially one part with a hinge at the bottom. It's not a mechanical hinge, it's just integrated into the material. So when we do a hinge in wrapped rigid boxes, we quite often will make the components separately, separate boxes. They're not connected. And then we use a thinner piece that's also wrapped that creates our hinge. And I'm going to show how to do that. That'll be part of the variation on the techniques and how this works. So I'm going to make these halves separately. That simplifies everything. And since I'm going to make several boxes, I'm actually going to end up making multiples of these. I'm going to make 4 of these boxes so I can demonstrate the different processes in class without having to build them separately. So that's how this is going to work. So to make those 4, I needed to cut out these parts. So I cut out, this is the back of the box, and then I have these pieces here, you know, the tops and the bottoms. I had to make some decisions about which part is going to overlap, because we have an option here. I can put this sitting it in here and glue it, or I can make this go on top and glue it. I mean, it's only 1/8 of an inch, but that is quite a bit. That can change our geometry, especially if you have 2 sides. You have 1/8 and 1/8, and then you're up close to 1/4 of an inch of variance. That's quite a bit of tolerance. So my decision, every time you do this, you have to think to yourself, does it matter if I'm inside or on top? Is there any reason why I might want to make a decision? I decided it didn't really matter. There was no reason, because I'm going to glue this all together, sand it a little bit, and then wrap the whole thing. So there was no reason for me to do one over the other. So I just arbitrarily picked something. So I made the back panel the entire height of the object, of the box. So what that means, I'm going to glue this to the inside. So then I had to calculate how big this dimension is going to be. How long this panel is, and then adding this 1/8 inch of material. And then I could do my geometry. So what's going to happen is when I glue that to that, I have the side panel, which is now going to overlap the back and cover the side. So it is bigger than that top panel by that 1/8 of an inch. So I had to make sure I kept track of all of that. So when I glue this together, it's going to work. So that's it. So once I figured that all out, then I just cut out all the panels. And I'm starting to glue that together here. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate quickly. And then after I glue these individual boxes together, I'm going to wrap them separately and then combine them and then ultimately make that insert tray at the bottom. So to do this, I'm just using plain Elmer's glue. And I'm just going to put some glue on this edge. So when we're working with chipboard and making a wrap structure, it's ultimately going to be covered. So the cleanliness and the glue pouring over the edges is a little less critical than when we're making boxboard structures and other kinds of things, where we're actually going to be seeing the material. Here, all of this material is going to be completely covered. So a lot of those nuances. So I'm just making sure all these edges line up. And then the best way to do this is just put a little bit of tape. So let me just hold this nice and tight. I'm just going to pull that across the top. And I'm going back there and making sure that that edge is lining up. And doing the same thing here. Just using my nail just to get that. I don't want to completely, it's very hard to get off, but just enough to hold that into position. So we can let that dry. So I'm just going to double check how all this works. So if I'm slightly off a little, we can do a little bit of sanding and cleaning, but get as accurately as possible. So this is craftsmanship. If you take the time to make all of the, I cut them as accurately as I possibly could. And then now if I glue them very accurately, everything should stay nice and clean and everything should fit. Because obviously I got to get the bottle to fit and I have to get the other components to fit inside. So now I have all of these 3 set up. and this is inside. So these are pre-cut. I'm just going to check for warping. If anything's slightly warped and curved, I will probably put the high part of the warp in the middle so I can press that down. It's actually pretty clean. So I want to take this part and put this on here. And it's slightly long, which is better than slightly short, because I can glue this in here and get it into position. Then I can just sand off any little edges. So that looks pretty good. So I'm going to use that part right here. I'm just going to check about how much overlap I have. And I'll just sort of even that out, and I'll sand that. Because those little overlapping edges sometimes can show up through the wrapping material. Now this one I'm going to wrap with that gold, and it does have a bit of a metallic. It's not like a mirror finish, but it does have a bit of a sheen to it. So the shinier the material, the more imperfections will show up, because highlights will start to pick up. That's why when I did that other tray in matte black, a lot of the nuances and maybe little bumps and things like that did not show up. But the matte black gets fingerprints and dust marks, and it can get quite crazy. So there's always variations to this that are good and bad in both techniques. I'm just going to try to center this. I'm going to start right here in the middle, because things are slightly warped. So what we want to do is flex things into position and have the glue. So I'm going to set that up in the center, and then I'm going to come over here to these edges, push that in the middle, try to get this all to line up as clean as possible. And then I'll come over to this side here and just glue that. I'm sort of setting that edge. Now these edges can kind of, well, actually it looks pretty good. I was saying I could move that, but that's really clean. Oh, here, this is what I'm talking about. So it's not quite lined up. So now I'm going to come over here and move that over and try to, even though it's a little long there, I'm going to just try to keep that as accurate as I can. So when I sand that, I'll kind of know that that's nice and square. So I'm just going to pull that in there. So it's a little bit of extra there, which is fine. If there was less material, that's when you get like a little bump and a dent. And I could sand that and make that perfectly clean right there. So that actually looks pretty good. I almost don't need tape down here. Okay, so that lined up very nicely. So I know that if that's lined up, it should be very square because I cut it square. If I had cut it crooked, then it'll be crooked. So even this glue that's kind of oozing inside, it's really not that critical. Normally I would go in there and clean that up, but I know that's all going to get covered, so it's not that critical. All right, so this is good. Looks great. So it's just a matter of putting the other side on. Okay, so I'm also going to simulate this geometry, which is just made out of the foam core, to test the functionality of this. So we're going to make this out of the chipboard and wrap it in the gold material, so it'll be more of a prototype than a mock-up, and we'll simulate how this is actually going to be made. So same process as we did the rest of the box. I have the components cut out. I cut out the circular top piece, and I'm going to have the two side panels. I just got to keep track of what's overlapping and how big things are, because I'm working out from the outside boxes, which I have done. So I just need to make sure that everything lines up so it'll function the same as this part. So I have this part fitting inside, line to line, front to back, and I'm going to glue both panels on. And then this part will line up and cover the ends, and this will give us the same geometry as we have over there. I glued this one on already, so it's the same process. We're just going to edge glue all these pieces together, and then I'm using the tape to hold it. And then when it sets up, I'll just sort of sand the edges a little bit, and then I'm going to wrap this, and then we will put a insert. I'm going to do like a foam core insert just to simulate what the EVA foam on the inside would look like. Get this to line up. So again, it's not as critical that these glue areas be completely clean, because we are going to cover the whole thing. but we'll get close. And then just do a final check. All right, that looks pretty good. Let me try to keep it as square as possible. It's a little off there, but it's not bad. That's going to flex a little. This one's probably set up already. Just going to make sure that tape is out of the way. So once this is set, then we can put this end piece on, which will give us our third axis, which will hold this together nicely. So again, I'm just going to start with one end here, make sure that that's on center, and then drop it down to the sides. Okay. And that looks good. So that's off a little bit, but I'm going to sand that down on the bottom. I'll use that as my last edge to get that to hold. Okay. This. Okay, so it looks like I need a little bit more pressure over here, so I'll put the tape towards this end. Pull that in. All right, that looks good. Okay, so that'll give us the same proportions that we have for this part. And then when I add that piece on there, that should be perfect. So I'll do the other end, but once this is glued together, we need the insert part. So I'm taking foam core, like I said, just to simulate what this might be like. I anticipate this probably being out of EVA, which would be a similar kind of a process where they die cut the components and they can glue it together or fuse it together, because it is it's a synthetic material, but it's got that high dense foam kind of feeling. And there'll be a pad at the bottom. And again, in this situation, I'll probably put something rigid, whether it's plastic or something like that, because this is being suspended while it's in the box. So we don't want it to break through. But this will just be a simulation. So for foam core, I just took 3 pieces, cut the circles out. And then while it's without the bottom, I go in and I sand and clean this inside piece. And then I laminate this piece on the bottom to get that to fit together. And then I sand the outside of that, and then I have this part here, which is nice and clean. So I'm separating that from this part, because what I want to do is I'm going to wrap this whole piece in the gold material. And I'm going to roll all of these edges. Even in here, I'm going to have a bunch of tabs, and I'm going to roll them under. So this is going to be a nice, clean gold edge. And then when this is all finished, I will insert this part in the bottom here and glue that into position. So that gives us that the simulation of what the EVA might be inside. And I'm probably going to leave it white, because white is part of the form language. So we'll see how that looks. I'm not sure if the gold and the white will work, but that'll give us this nice V-block configuration. So it should function like the foam core part did. All right, the chipboard box is made and it's assembled and glued. So I had little edges, so I went around and just sanded everything and made it as clean as possible, and then eased the edge, which means just sort of sand off any kind of a sharp corner so we can get ready to wrap that. So it looks good. So I'm using this gold material as the wrap. It's actually like a wrapping paper. It's quite nice, but it has a nice kind of a gold sheen to it, a little bit of a finish, which will be quite different. It'll reflect the light in the corners a lot differently than the black box that I made, but it's very thin, so I need to be very careful. Most of the time in rigid boxes and case bound, they do use a wet glue, an adhesive. They usually brush it on and then wrap it around. Some of these wet glues, I just have Elmer's, and I don't really have the exact glue that they use. So the Elmer's is a little too wet, and it kind of buckles, and it doesn't work as well. So I've been showing these tutorials by using the Twin Tack, the double sticky material, which is basically just a adhesive with a wax coating on both sides, and you can peel it off. It works pretty well because it's not wet. There's no drying going on, and it's very, very sticky and holds pretty well. The thing is, once you put this down, you can't move it. You can't even pull it up because it'll tear the paper. So it is a little challenging to work with. So I'm doing the best I can. So I have done this where I have put the Twin Tack material all over this, and I peel it off, and this whole thing has adhesive on it. And I try to place this and roll things over, and it is difficult. Because if you don't do it just right, or you try to line it, or if I'm trying to trim little edges, it's extremely complicated to do. So what I've been doing, I've been putting adhesive on here in pieces so I can assemble this one step at a time. So this is what it looked like. I did my pencil work on here, and I made 2 of these because I'm going to be wrapping 2 boxes like this, and they go together, and that makes the complete package. So I just, in pencil, just laid out 2 of these things. It's not that complicated, so I didn't need to do a die line or set that up. It can be done that way if it's easier. So that's how that started. And I'm laying these pieces of the Twin Tack on here in sections. So I can, put something down, peel off a section, and wrap that separately while everything is still covered. So it just gives me a little space to breathe and work this out. So I have some of these Twin Tack pieces set up. I had put this one on, I trimmed the corners, I put that one on. So I'm going to put this one on and then that one on. I'm actually going to do the middle. I'm going to stick that on the bottom of the box and then place that, because it's very important that I start perfectly on center and then wrap all these other edges in. So with this material, you can peel off the backing, and now this is extremely tacky, and there's an adhesive on the other side that will peel off for that second stage. So this also allows me to do this in sections. So I'm going to try to line that up right on that edge. Looks good. And then I'm just going to drop that down onto the paper. That actually worked better. Here I was slightly off, but I'm okay because that's going to be a hidden corner there that goes inside. So it worked pretty well. So what's happening is I have a little extra here in this corner. So I'm just going to trim that out. And I'll just do that on both ends and have a little bit extra on that last edge. So I made the material a little bit longer than I needed here, because that's going to wrap to the inside. So quite often I'll miscalculate and I won't get that to line up on the inside corner. So I just added a little bit of extra. So I'm probably going to trim this again when I get to that point. So I'm going to get all these adhesive sections in place first. Okay, that'll be trimmed later. All right, so that's good. So these are ready. So all I have to do is put on this last square, and then we'll mount the box in the middle. So make sure I have set this up right. So you might not be able to see, but I do have a light pencil line there that I'm going to use to get this leading edge in there as square as I can. Like so. And then I have a little extra here. Okay. So I might want to trim that. We'll see how that looks as I start to build this. All right, so now I have these sections of the Twin Tack in place. So I'm just going to double check here. I want this to sit here as perfectly as I possibly can in the center. Oops. And let's see if I can do that. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to put the adhesive, let's set that up, on the bottom of the box. I'm going to start that way. It's a little easier to place the box into position. So I'm going to do it that way instead. So if I place this here accurately. Okay, not bad. Okay, so I might just trim this off. So those are little things that when you do something handmade like that, to be able to make little modifications as you go, because nothing is absolutely perfect. Things might not be square. So I'm just going to burnish that down, get that on there really nice. So all I have to do is peel off. Is it coming off? No. I have to try to just get the backing material. There we go. So if I peel this off, I'll have that adhesive on there ready to go. And then I can just place this into position here. So let's see if I can do that. So I might do it like in a 3/4 view like this so we can see. I'm gonna make sure it's sticking down nicely. See this chip, we can see all these little bumps. The chipboard is very uneven. We want to make sure to get that. That's why the wet glue is really good to use. It gets in there. But to simulate this prototype, as a designer, this process works pretty well. Okay, so I need to get this. So I'm kind of floating this box, looking at my little edges here. Trying to get that to line up. And that looks pretty good. Very good. Excellent. Okay. So important to get that right on center because all of these things will relate to this being centered. But I can make some modifications on each one of these panels as I fold them up. So now we're going to start to look at this and see how this works. It's a nice clean edge there. It's good. So I don't want to pull that too much because we might tear it. That's why I ease that edge a little bit so it's slightly round, but not too round. I don't want to actually put a full radius on there, just sort of lighten up on how that might work. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to start to simulate how this might roll in. So one of the big things we have to do right now, this is coming up the side. This is going to go inside. So we can see that I need to come across this top here on a diagonal. So that diagonal will go this way. I'm just going to make a little mark so I can see which way I'm going, and then I'm going to remove the material so that can fit inside. And then the same thing will happen here. So this is sticking out a little bit bigger here. So let me indicate that. I'm going to come in at a 45 right here, and then I'm going to go that way. So I'm going to do that as accurately as I can. I'm sort of lining that up with that inside edge inside the box. And let's see if I can get some a little more light over here. And I'm going to trim that away this here, and then I'm going to simulate this little 45-degree angle right here. Simulate, I meant guess. Get that to fit in there. And then the same thing needs to happen over here on this side. And then we'll do that 45 degree. That 45 degree is going to come across the top. So we'll see if we can get that to work. Okay, so I'm going to go like this. I still have this backing paper on here, but I just want to make sure that this is going to fit inside as best I can. Ooh, it looks like this is going to make it. Okay. So I added extra, but it's almost not enough. Okay, so this is ready to be pulled up. Go to the inside, and then I'm going to wrap these two corners around that part. So this is ready to go. Let's see if I can get this off. It can be a little challenging to get this started. It's very important that this edge roll in really tight on the bottom. So I'm pressing pretty firmly to get that to sit nice and tight right there. I'm going to take a look at that from the outside before I go any further. Make sure that's nice and clean. So I didn't use a mirrored material. This is just sort of has a nice sheen to it, because you can see some of the bumps and the imperfections on here because it is this board, and the paper is very thin. So it's going to have a little bit of a kind of a bumpy texture on it. Okay, so that looks good. And the idea is to get this on that top edge very tight right there. And then pushing this down to the inside. Wow. Just made it. I thought I was going to have a little extra material to remove at the bottom there, but it looks like this is going to sit just right. Oops. Wrinkled a little bit there. I got a little bit of a wrinkle. See if I can burnish that down. Okay, so see, things aren't absolutely perfectly square. So we have little things there. Not bad though. Okay, so the next part is bringing this around the corner here. Get that out of the way slightly. Let's just see if I can bring that up nice and tight right in here. That looks good. And that's what gives us that nice corner in this other axis coming around by having that fold inside, and then this piece will go on top, and that's why I'm going to clean that little white edge off. Okay. And then the same thing on this side. Okay. Looks good. So let's just see here. I have a little bit of extra material sticking up right in here. Let's just trim that out. Okay, and there's that little 45-degree angle. It's almost like a bevel cut that will come in and meet the other side when I trim that. All right. So now I can't do these yet because I got to do this side first so I can get those tabs to come around the corner. So the order of events is very critical. Okay. Things together. I know we just have a glue joint in there, which isn't the strongest joint, but when you wrap this material around, it helps to hold it together. So it is a structural as well as a decorative part to hold this together. All right, so we're going to do the same thing on these ends, but this is a little easier because I don't have the wrap tab. So we're going to do the same process where I'm going to do that little 45-degree notch and then get that to lock in there. So I just need to back off on this material to here. And then we'll put that little 45 right there. same thing on this side. So like I've mentioned, this is, I got a little bit of the adhesive here. Not sure if we're going to see that, but I'm going to make sure I get that cleaned out of there. Let's see if I can even see what I'm doing. Just a little, like a little white edge right there could be very unsightly if I'm not careful. I'm just going to cut this backwards here. Let's see if I can, let me try this with my right hand, which is probably not a good idea since I'm left-handed. I'll give it a try. Okay. Oh, not bad. Oh, all right, maybe I should be right-handed. All right, so there's that. This looks like it's going to clear. All right, that looks good. That's ready to go. So we'll try to peel off this backing. Like this. I'm going to press down on that leading corner like this. Press that down. So here, it's a great little corner. It's all covered nicely. Okay. All right. And then bring it across this top. This is a little bit of a shorter edge, so the chances of buckling are a little less. Let's hope I can prove that. Okay, now this is going all the way down onto the floor. Interesting, it's a little different. You can see it's leaning down on the bottom there. I could have trimmed that out, but that'll be covered, so it's okay. I'm going to, triangle. I'm just going to press this corner in here. Get that to roll in there. So that's good. Excellent. Very nice. All right, so that looks good. Okay, so that's covering one half. I'll do the same process on the other half. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a light piece of board with the twin tack and mount the gold and just make a nice little panel, clean panel, a little bit more rigid. The paper's a little too flimsy. And I think I'll just put that in there and then I'll clean up the bottom, make it all gold. So we'll take a look at this as a gold component. I might print out the art that I had on the other one with the nice linear pattern on it. So I might stick some red panels on here and allow the gold to shine through on just the corners. We'll see how everything turns out and we'll make some adjustments. I'm just using this brand and this coloring just to show this process and how this can be done, because I've done a couple of other ones like this too. I want to show the variety of techniques to make structures like this. All right, so we have the outer boxes wrapped. So we have two of these. I made them as separate parts, which was different than the corrugated structure. So what we have to do is put these together and provide the hinge area at the bottom. So we have the two separate boxes. We need to put that piece in there. And then also create this back panel. I brought all the overlap panels all the way down in. Some of them are a little long, so I just push them down into the corner, which is kind of fine. So it's a little unfinished there. So what I did was I took a piece of box board. This is about 20 point box board, relatively thin. And I used the double tack also and glued that onto this and created this panel. So what we can do is just push this down in here, and then that would be glued into position, and then we get a nice finish all inside. So now the whole thing is very homogeneous looking. It's wrapped, it's very beautiful, it's very clean. And we did that on 2 parts. So I have both parts completed. So what we need to do is put these together with the hinge at the bottom, so this whole thing will articulate correctly. So nothing is perfect, so always take a moment. So I'm going to check these, put them together, and see how they fit. So this kind of is falling to the side a little bit. So let me see if I just turn these over. They're symmetrical, so I can work with them from either axis, which is kind of nice. So this sits a little bit better like this. So let me just take a quick check. If I just alternate these, do I get a little better kind of connection between the two? So that's not bad. Because once I glue these together, I'm done. And now we've gotten to the point where I spent a lot of time making these. This looks pretty good. Kind of sits there, it kind of naturally fits really well. I am going to have the magnets, I'm going to have the base in there, but I might as well get this to be as nice as possible. Okay, so this looks good. So I'm going to create a panel here. Let's call this the bottom. And it'll be just a flat piece of SBS board, probably the same 20 point. So I have a strong, and I don't want to use too thin a board because I don't want that hinge to be very, very weak, but I want it to be easy. So when it opens, it doesn't want to close too quickly because of the cardboard. All right, so this looks nice. This wants to stay. So I'm just going to put this off to the side for a second, and we're going to glue to that surface. So what I did was I created this panel here on the bottom at a box board. I rolled all the edges, and I created this little fold, which is pretty strong. So it's this 20-point white board, and I did 45-degree angles and folded it over. So they're not perfect. It didn't quite line up because I was using the double tack, and it's hard to get all that to work. But that'll all be hidden. We're only going to see this, so it'll be nice and clean. So I'm going to take this and glue this onto the bottom. So how I did this, I just made the cardboard, and I cut out, I did my line work, which we can't see right now, but I have the square inside here, and I cut all these 45-degree angles, and then I put the twin tack on there. So when I peel off this twin tack, you're going to see my line work because the actual adhesive in the middle is clear and you can see right through this. Once I peel that off, you can take the cardboard and place that right into position and get that as accurately as possible. Actually, when I put it in, I missed a little bit, so I had one of the little corners coming out, but it was close. So you would stick that in there, and then you would just roll over these corners, and then you get this nice clean kind of edge here. I'm trying to keep all of this in the gold at this point. I'm going to interject some red, but that'll come a little later. So that's how that was made. So with this in mind, this is my hinge that needs to line up with the seam here. And I'm going to glue that together. So just for this situation, I'm going to make sure that these things stay together nicely. So I'm just going to put a rubber band around this. It's almost like to make sure that these don't move too much and they're pressing in nice and tight, because that's ultimately how I want this box to close, to keep that nice and clean. So that's just for this situation. So I'm going to get that nice and set up, and I'm going to want to glue this. Now you can see I made this inboard. Inboard meaning it's not right up to the edge, it's slightly inside all around. That keeps that from sticking out and getting dog-eared, and keep it in there. Actually, for this situation, this whole bottom plate could have been made out of another material, maybe something a little more durable, because it is the foot. It could have some kind of a texture to it or something like that to keep it kind of stable. But I'm just going to go for this look of making it all out of one material. So when you look at that, you almost think to yourself, well, that's all one box, even though it's several parts put together. So that's how that's going to work. So I'm just going to use wet glue to put this together. We could use a twin tack again. Either way will work. So I'm going to apply this glue, and I don't want it to be oozing out all over the place. So I'm going to try to keep it inboard from the edge a little bit. And I'm going to keep it away from the jaw. I'm going to think of these as almost like two panels. This needs to be pretty strong because this is holding the whole thing together. So I'm going to do that on both sides. And stay away from the hinge because the hinge is the area in between the two boxes. So we don't want the glue to ooze in there and get in the way. So again, not too much, but enough. And that's very hard to judge. So something like that, I think should work really well. So I got to make sure I get it in the right orientation. It is square. Do not want to do this. I want the hinge to line up with the seams of the boxes. So since it is wet glue, I can move it around a little bit. I can get it into position. Unlike the twin tack, where once you put that down, you're kind of done. So it's a little bit of a trade-off on the two different kinds of adhesives. All right, wrapping the insert, this base insert in the bottom, will be a little bit of a different process. It's very similar to what we're going to do. We're going to wrap it all around, but we do have the circular configuration, and we need to wrap the material around that. So I'm going to use the same gold material, but this was very thin. So what I did for the outer box, which I showed you already, I used the twin tack, the double tack adhesive. So it wouldn't, the wet glue wouldn't soak into. This is almost like a wrapping paper. It's very, very thin. So when you use the wet glue, it kind of wrinkles and distorts it a little bit, but it's a little bit of back and forth. If you use the glue very sparingly, the wet glue, it can work. So I'm just going to change this up a little bit just to take a look at a different process. Also with the wet glue and even with the twin tack, some of the bumpy textures on the chipboard kind of show through, so it's not as clean because this is not a very nice board. Now, if you made this out of a nicer, smoother board, it would be fine, and nobody would know the difference. I mean, we can call it chip, and then you wrap it. It's just that much easier. But I'm using the chip because that is sort of the standard and what they use, and I'm just trying to wrap this in different techniques. So what I did was I took the geometry, built this, and then I created this sort of die line of what the wrap paper would look like. So I could estimate that, and I could put this on the gold paper and trim it out so I can have all the line. I didn't want to create all this line work right on the gold paper in case I need to modify it. So this is like a quick die line of what the wrapping paper will look like that goes around this geometry. So I took that, and I actually took the gold paper and I doubled it up. I used some spray mount, so I made it twice as thick. So it's not that as thin. So I'm going to try to do this with wet glue and see if I can get this to work, just to demonstrate how that works. So it's doubled up of the gold. And the reason I doubled it up and I didn't put it on a white piece of paper is because sometimes we're going to see these edges when we wrap. If I put it on a white piece of paper, we'll see a white edge. And that won't work really well. So I wanted to use the same gold because it's very homogeneous. It's gold all the way through. So when we cut it, we won't see any white edges. So doubled up gold, and I have all this cut out. So you see the unique part is I have these little tabs that are around the circle, and that's what we're going to, once we glue this in, we're going to fold all those little tabs underneath, and then it'll give us a nice clean round edge. That's the big difference between this and the outer box. Okay, so I have this set up, so I'm going to do this with the wet glue. I can do this in stages. Instead of peeling away the twin tack like I did before, I took out different sections, and that can be a little challenging to get that to work. So I'm going to try to do this with the wet glue and see how this works. So my line work is slightly big, which is better than slightly small. So this, since it is a handmade process, we're going to do this step by step and see if I can get this to work. Okay, so let's start. I'm going to use the wet glue, and I'm going to be somewhat sparing, but I need to be completely covering these surfaces. So I'm going to put this glue just on this top surface to start with and get that to set nice. And then I'll start wrapping all the edges one by one and bring them around. If I do it systematically like that, it gives me time to make each one set as perfectly as possible. So I'm going to try to spread this around evenly. Now the evenness is so it doesn't dry irregularly under the gold material, but I have the gold material doubled up, so that should help. So I really don't know exactly what's going to happen. I'm just trying this as a different approach, see how this works. Okay. always try to keep that clean, because when I start putting this down. All right, so now this is the idea here, is to get this perfectly centered. And since it is wet glue, it gives me a moment or two to take a look. I can move it around a little bit. Unlike the twin tack, because once you put that down, you're done. So this is a little less scary doing it this way. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Okay, I'm checking how the center holds. So I'm just going to press that down. And since it is the wet glue, we need to give it a moment to set. Okay, so I'm just going to check on this surface and see how we're doing. That's not bad. Once I did this with the wet glue before on a thinner paper, and it was buckling all over the place and wrinkling. So this isn't too bad. So doubling up this particular paper worked. So it all depends on your project. You know, the geometry you have, what you're trying to do, the paper that you pick, how thick it is. There's no real definitive right answer. It's just experimenting. So what I would do, if you're just starting out doing this, take a piece of the chipboard, just a little piece of scrap, take a piece of your paper, try it with the wet glue, see how it holds up, let it dry, and see what kind of surface you're going to get. And then you can be a little more confident on some of the decisions you make as you go. So this is all about craftsmanship and patience. Okay, so that's sitting there nice. Now I'm going to start to wrap each one. So just like before, we have we can wrap up this axis, and I'm going to wrap in around this angle. So these we're going to do first, because this has the overlapping tab here, because I want that overlapping tab to go behind these. So we're going to work on these first and bring these up, and I'll do each side individually, separately. So we can do that, take our time to do that. All right, so let's make sure that that's seating nice. I'm going to rush this along a little bit so I can do this all at the same time, but it would be a good idea to let that sit nice. So when you start folding this, we get a nice crisp edge there. So we should be okay. Okay, so now I'm going to do each one of these sides separately. So the 100% coverage is good. So hopefully it'll dry evenly. Because what happens is the wet glue, what it does is it expands whatever papers it's touching. It expands a little bit, and then it can get a little wrinkly, but then when it dries, it shrinks. So we have to account for some of that movement of the material when we're doing this. So I sanded this chipboard nicely, so we have really nice clean edges without any steps from the material. Okay, so the next step, I want to go back to this side that I've done already. Make sure that that's... So we're going to bring these around. I'm not sure if I'm going to trim. I might just leave that, because it's nice to have that little angled material in that corner. It's a little binding, but it's not bad. So that might be good to leave. I might trim that out. That's buckling a little there. So we'll see. So these are little trial and errors here. So I have a little extra material, which is good. So if I decide to trim it back, I can. But I think I might just leave that. And I have a little overlap here in the corner. This inside is really not that critical, because we're going to put a foam insert in here. So this actually looks pretty good. Huh. Okay, so let's stay with that. So I'm going to do each one of these. That's what's nice about this process. I can do each little tab separately. Gives me time to make the adjustments as I go. Okay, not bad. Just going to squish the glue in there a little. Back up, make sure it's in there. Huh, looks good. All right, so this might work out pretty well. Just gonna pull that in nice and tight. Get that to go into the corner. Just try to keep the glue off your fingers, because once you start rubbing the nice outside piece, you don't want to get that too much glue on that. Okay, so I'm just going to use this triangle to push that in the corner. Like I said, visually, this is not that critical in here. But structurally, I don't want that to get in the way, because I do want to wrap this other piece around. And this is the bottom of this part, so we're not going to see a lot of that detail. But while we're at it, we might as well make it as clean as we can. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Nice rolled edge, and I have a little bit in the corner there. Huh, so that's nice. So it's turned out a little bit better than I thought, which is always nice. Right up to that edge. That's great. That's actually quite nice. Yeah. So I have a little bit of extra here because my calculations are off, but when I bring this down, that'll cover that. And so let's just do this while we're here. Okay. Okay, so it's not that edge we're going to see. We are going to see this little step from this tab. It's kind of hard to avoid. That won't be bad. But then again, if you think, remember, this is going to go in the outer box. We're not really going to see. All we're really going to see is a little bit of this front and the top. That's all that's really visual. But I always try to just take a moment and just make it nice all around, make it as clean as possible. Because sometimes these things that we think are cosmetic, sometimes they're functional, like tabs get in the way or thicknesses get in the way. So I just try to just make it as perfect as possible. I need to bring in the two outer edges, and then even this, I'm gonna mark this, see. This outside is just like a little bit of a trim, not much. But the inside, I need to come all the way into here. Let's make sure that this is pushed in nice and clean. Okay, so we're talking about coming all the way into here. So I allowed a lot of extra material. Like if I was a little short, again, this is the inside, so it's not that critical, but it's just nice to keep that straight. Okay, here, this looks good. All right. All right, so now I can make those modifications right here while it's flat. Much easier to trim when it's flat. So here we're just taking just a slight bit off here. Like that. Again, here we go with this left-handed, right-handed thing. Oy. All right, let me try this with my right hand. It's just a slight bit that I want to take off of there. All right, so let's see if I can do this with my other hand. Voila. Okay, not bad. So I lost my little angle here, so I need to make sure, because we want the angle to overlap there if we can. So I'm going to go like this, kind of winging it a little bit. Like this. And I'm going to use that little calculation I made there to remove that material. And I'm going to, since it's a little bit of a bigger cut, I'm going to use my left hand. Okay. All right, so that should be good. It's that little angle I cut is coming over the top to cover that little corner. So that works pretty good. A little bit inside, but not bad. Again, it's the inside. We're not going to see that. So that looks really nice. Let's check the depth. Well, that's almost perfect. Okay. So I'm going to leave the depth being coming into this edge here. What if I should do the tabs next? Actually, I might do that. Do these guys, because those are going to fold under into here, and this one looks a little long. So I might want to do that first. Okay, so these little cuts I made, I didn't go all the way. And I feel them tearing slightly, but they're tearing in a controlled way, so it gives me a nice clean edge. So I don't mean tearing in a bad way, it's actually pretty good. So this can be a little time consuming, so I'm going to go through the process and I'll just probably edit out some of that so you guys don't have to watch me do this 50 times, however long this is going to take. Less, I just need a little. It's just enough to hold it. That one doesn't have glue. Okay. Okay, not bad. Looks nice. So that's the main difference of this part is this tab approach. And this tab approach can be used in several different ways. I have other tutorials where I'm actually wrapping paper on a curved surface this way, and I'm folding tabs over and then capping that off with another piece of material. And that would be more on a positive angle, an exposed edge on a wrap box. I have that on a different tutorial. Similar process. Because after you watch enough of these, you'll go, okay, it's kind of the same thing over and over again with slight variations to it. Once you get a feel for it, then you'll be able to kind of run with it and do whatever you guys want. Okay, looks good. Okay, so there they are all wrapped around the corner. And then we have this nice clean edge. It's great. That's where the bottle's going to fit in. And then we're going to have this foam insert. So I'll show you that in a minute. So this is the one that I have trimmed. And it looks ready to go. So we could probably put that in there. And that's going to be nice and clean. Okay. So that's ready to go. I could put the glue on either one, but I think I'll just put it on the back of the paper. It's a little easier to control. I probably should smooth this out, but I think I'm just going to move this along. And just squish it on there. Okay. Very nice. Okay. So when I mentioned I backed up this a gold foil material onto itself, I didn't mount it to like a white piece of board or thin piece of paper to make it thicker. Because if I had, we would see a little white edge here of that kind of backing paper. So that's just a general rule of thumb. You got to be careful about where your edges are going to be exposed and what we're going to see. So we know that all of this is going to be hidden in the outer box, so it's not as critical. But just for reference, when you do something and you see exposed edges, you have to be careful. If you're going to back up some material, you should be careful about what you use so you don't see it, because then it's nice and gold. Looks good. So all this wrinkling, I think, should subside when it dries. Let's hope. Not bad. Okay, so now we're back to trimming this. Let's see how this looks. That looks really, we're not really going to see a lot of that. But it's just a test to see how the wet glue versus the double tack. Okay, so that's that part. Excellent. So just for reference, this was the everything else, and a couple other parts I made. So again, this is going to fit in here. So I'm doing this gold, all gold inside. So that'll fit there. I took the little wooden pieces, which are going to be maybe extrusions or something, and I just wrapped one layer of the gold right onto the piece of the wood. And this is what's going to get glued in here on both sides. And that's what gives me my clamping action that we're going to have when this goes inside. Okay, a little snug there, but we're going to have these magnets. Not bad. Huh. Slightly tight, being because these little wooden pieces clamp the outside, so I needed space for that. So that should be fine. Looks like that's going to work. And I'm going to glue those into position. And then I made these parts. This is the, this will be like an EVA foam, like we're going to use in the base. And I just wrapped some gold. So this is, I'm faking this a little bit. This would probably be more of a box structure with the EVA on the inside. But since I'm using foam, it's relatively rigid. I just took some paper. I backed it up. I took the gold, backed it up with a little bit of cardboard. I sandwiched these foam core pieces together, made a nice curve here. I did some notches in here, so this will go together. And I'm going to use some magnets. Where are my little? I have another. Where'd they go? Oh, I have them inside. Okay, yeah. So they're actually in here. So I'm just going to drop the little circle in here. I have these little magnets, and then they sit in here, and I'm trapping them with this board. So I tested the magnets to see if they're going to go through 2 layers of board plus the gold, because we want these two things to snap together, and it works, so it should be fine. And these will sit here in the top like this on both sides, so when I come across like this, that they'll snap together, and then they'll hold the bottle into position. Okay, so that's it for wrapping this piece. So we'll see how this dries, and hopefully all those little wrinkles will go away. All right, so here's the finished box. The lighting isn't ideal. It's a little dark here, but it'll be good enough. So we have the magnet closures at the top, so this seals pretty well. It snaps open, and then this kind of folds to the side like this, and it holds open. So I don't have any exterior structures or other components to hold that. It's just the nature of the parts fitting, so it kind of bottoms out. So we have the 2 magnet pieces here with the EVA foam. So that comes around, traps the closure at the top. And then by taking out, this still holds with the structure down the bottom. So it's just about the mechanics of this piece fitting in here, which is quite nice. So this is the EVA block that would be inside, and then that would be mounted in there to keep that, and it stays below the little V cut. And then of course that lines up with these little wedge pieces that we have in the bottom that I've kind of spot glued into position. So it's when they come out, they trap this piece on the sides and it holds that down in there like that. So it works pretty well. Some little tuning that has to be done, but it's not bad. It works, it really works well. And then that sits inside. So that's it.